Can you live off your Uber and Lyft income in 2024? If you want to become an Uber driver or a Lyft driver, can you fully live off that income alone? I'm going to give you a short answer and then a long answer. Short answer, yes. 100% yes. Long answer, still yes, but with a massive asterisk on that yes. Because the truth is, I think in common speak, it really depends. And in this video, I'm gonna get into the nitty gritty. This is gonna be a very raw, unedited, fireside chat style video. Where let's say me and you are hanging out and you're like, hey man, I know you know a lot about Uber and Lyft, you do all these videos. Do you think if I drove full time, could I actually live on that income? Could I not even have to do any other job and fully live on that income, right? Now, first off, I want to say, yes, you absolutely can. The bigger question, I think, going now a bit down that rabbit hole of driving through Uber and Lyft is, well, how hard or easy is it going to be to actually live off that income? And it may be trickier than you think. It also may be easier than you think. But if I had to pick one, I'd say yes, while you can live on that income, it may be a lot harder than you may initially think. Now, starting at least at, I think the most important thing when it comes to this video is two things. One, your location is the number one factor that determines how much money you can make as a driver. I've said this in a ton of videos, and for good reason. It's unfortunately true. If you live, let's say, in LA, or in Boston, or in San Diego, or San Francisco, or New York, you being able to live on that income becomes a lot more feasible and easier than, let's say, if you live in a rural part of Ohio, Florida, etc., etc. There's been a lot of studies that have just shown in general that the income spread can be way more dramatic and drastic than you could potentially realize. So unfortunately, if you don't live in what I like to call a hotspot area, it's going to be way harder than you think to live on that income. The second thing now, which I think is very important for this video, because again, everybody's situation is a bit different. To some people, they can live on, and I'm making numbers up. To some people, they may say, you know what? If I can make $3 to $4 grand a month, I'm fine. To other people, they're like, hey, I would not be able to even function on $3 to $4 grand a month. I need $5 to $6 grand a month, right? Everybody's living situation's a bit different. Of course, this also depends upon your area. So I'm gonna say this. On average, when people ask me, how much does the Uber driver and Lyft driver typically make? I'd say about 20 to 25 an hour on average. Sometimes it can be a lot more. I've talked to some drivers in some areas who make 30 to 40 an hour. Other times, I've talked to some drivers that may be closer to 15 to 20. But on average, I'd say 20 to 25 an hour. And to make numbers easy on this video, I'm gonna round it down. I'd much rather be more conservative when it comes to the numbers than more optimistic, right? Just so you know exactly what you're getting into. So you have to ask yourself, okay, $20 an hour, unfortunately doesn't really factor things like taxes, but any job you do, you have to pay taxes, right? The only two things that are certain in life, as Benjamin Franklin said, are death and taxes. But let's just say 20 an hour, flat 20 an hour. Well, that's where you have to start doing the math out. This is where things get really interesting, right? So for example, and again, going deeper down the rabbit hole, I'm gonna tell you everything you really need to know about the pros and the cons of being a driver. If you drive full time, let's you drive 40 hours a week. 40 hours a week, is very typical, hours. Most people work about 40-ish hours a week, give or take. Well, 40 times 20 equals $800 a week. Assuming, let's say 4 weeks in a month, just to make numbers very, very easy, you're looking at about $3,200 a month if you drive 40 hours a week. Again, I'm making numbers very simple and very easy for the sake of this video. You then have to ask yourself, can you live off $3,200 a month? Now, to some people, they may say, hey, you know what? I'm a single man or woman. I'm living, in a decent area, but rent isn't crazy. It's not like I'm living in some, wicked expensive part of San Francisco or New York. $3,200 a month, I can do that, right? And it's funny looking back throughout the years of what's happened with Uber and Lyft. I've done a bunch of videos. I've interviewed hundreds of drivers, maybe even over 1,000 drivers now at this point. I've read all these comments. It's interesting seeing trends. I remember back in Boston, you can make a good amount of money. And I remember, this is way back when, like 2014 or 15 even, maybe 2016, where I remember I met some people, and I'm not making this up, who would only drive 2 weekends out of the month. They'd go hard Friday and Saturday and Sunday, 3 days. They do that 2 weekends out of the month. So they would literally work 6-ish days, give or take, out of the month and make between $3,000 and $3,500. And they would fully live on that. And they were like, hey, I get to work 6 days a month. The rest of the month, I maybe just hang out, maybe play video games, do kind of what I want. I have complete freedom to do what I want, how I want, right? That's one of the benefits of Uber and Lyft. It's kind of crazy looking back on that. Now, not as much, right? With inflation increasing, there's a lot of factors working against you, because here's where things get really kind of annoying in 2024 now, because some of this video is going to be just the general finances of being a rideshare driver. Other parts of this video will be newer stuff that's happening in this year that you need to know about. First off, I'm going to call it the triple threat. I'm going to even add now a fourth one, so I might call it the quad threat, and that is this. One, Uber and Lyft drivers are making way less than ever before. Back in the day, when people asked me how much money did the typical Uber and Lyft driver make, I'd say 20 to 25 an hour. Now it's the same. That back in the day paid pretty well. Now, 20 to 25 an hour maybe doesn't have the same oomph maybe that it had before, so to speak. So first off, Uber and Lyft drivers getting paid less. Second, expenses. Gas, more expensive. Maintenance on your car, more expensive. Third, Uber and Lyft is taking a bigger cut than ever before. Not great either, right? If you make $100, Uber and Lyft might take out 60. You only walk away with 40, right? Or whatever. It does depend area to area, which is kind of weird that it's a bit variable. There's something to keep in mind. And the fourth one, which isn't necessarily working against you per se, but I think it kind of is. I guess you could look at it from two different angles, and that is tipping, right? Tipping, depending on where you are and how things work, back in the day, you never used to get tips. So I feel like it's more of like a newer addition, although that kind of methodology is going away. But I just did a video, and they found out, and a study by Gridwise, who does a lot of ride-sharing studies, only about 28% of rides get tips. So let's just round that down to a quarter. If you do 4 rides, only one person out of those 4 would typically tip. So the fourth thing working against you is you're just not getting tips compared to, like, say, another job, right? So with all these factors coming into play, especially now in 2024, the last one, which I think is another kind of issue, maybe I'll talk about 5 different things, especially one of them being relevant for this year, not just too many drivers being on the road. This has been a growing issue that a lot more people are considering doing Uber and Lyft with the income, with the economy not doing well, with people's income maybe being a bit fluctuating, and they're like, shoot, I gotta put ends meet on the table, I gotta save up more. If you think about it, for a secondary job, a lot of people are considering Uber and Lyft, and it makes sense. The flexible schedule, instant cash outs, low barrier to entry. It's very easy to sign up for Uber and Lyft. Most people at least have their driver's license, which means you can rent a car. And I just did a video about, like, say, renting a car with Uber, for example. So, like, signing up and being a driver, one of the easiest other jobs, and I might even say, for better or for worse, depending on how you look at it, I think Uber and Lyft is truly the best secondary job that, regardless of whatever else you do, whether you do a 9-to-5 job or let's you do something that's a bit more variable or a bit more flexible or a bit more unconventional, Uber and Lyft is the perfect kind of puzzle piece to fit into that equation for you when it comes to your income and your lifestyle and you working. So it makes sense a lot of people signing up. The issue with that, though, is the more drivers that are on the road, the harder it is to live off that income, right? Just in general. So these are all the different things you need to know. But going now back to, like, the main math, which I think is the most important thing for most people, you have to ask yourself, depending on when and how you drive, is $20 an hour going to be good enough? Now, there are some pros and cons about Lyft and Uber that you should know about when it comes to you looking at this. If you're watching this video, I'm assuming that you're saying, hey, you know what? Maybe I'm driving part-time with Lyft and Uber and I'm considering transitioning into full-time. Maybe you're watching this video saying, hey, you know what? I don't have a job and I'm going to do Lyft and Uber. Maybe you're between jobs. Maybe you're at a job that you hate and you're like, you know what? What if I drove full-time for Uber and Lyft just so I can quit my job, have something ready to go, lined up, of course. You don't want to leave a job before having a new job, right? Is it going to be worth it? And here's, I think, where things get, I'm going to be honest, a little bit more annoying. Sorry to say. Now, first off, you can make, like I said, $20 an hour on average. I'm going to keep using that amount because I think that's a good amount. In some cases, it could be more. In some cases, it could be less. But here's what you have to factor into. One, looking at the pro first, starting, I guess, with a positive. You really have an unlimited, put that in quotation marks, amount of hours you can drive for Uber and Lyft. Like I've seen a lot of videos, and in case this is your first time watching one of the videos, one example I use is when I used to be a bartender. I remember someone would go to my boss and be like, hey, I need hours. Can I work next week? And my boss would say, no, sorry, we have no more hours. Not the case with Uber and Lyft. There are legal limitations just for safety reasons for you driving. But typically, when it comes to people driving, you're looking at about a maximum 12 hours a day. So if you look at it, you have maximum 84 hours a week, give or take, depends upon your area and a lot of things. That's a pretty good amount, 84 hours a week. Hopefully I do this math right. Doing quick math in my head, 84 times 2 is what, $1,680. Hopefully I did that right. So if you think about it, if you drove, let's round that to 1,700, right? Because say, hopefully you get a lot more tips and everything. Round that to 1,700. 17 times 4 is, what is that, $6,800 a month? Not bad, right? Now, to some people, they may say, hey, let's round that down to $6,000 and make numbers easy. Could you live off $6,000 a month? To some people, they might say, you know what? Yeah, $6,000 a month. But remember, you may have to drive a lot. You may have to drive a little. It depends on a lot of different factors. To some people, that might make sense. Very solid positive. Going on the negative, though, what's tricky about driving full time and trying to live on that income is this. If, let's say, you drive part-time, they're what's called the peak hours. You probably know this, in case you know. They're the best hours to drive, where a lot of people are ordering Ubers on this. Therefore, you get paid more because Uber says, hey, we need drivers. We're going to incentivize you, basically is the idea. So as opposed to you making normal fares, you're going to make 1.5x that fare. Right? We all know this when you're ordering an Uber and Lyft, that sometimes ordering one can be very expensive because a lot of people are ordering it in that same area. So typically, the morning commutes, 7 to 9 a.m., evening commutes, 5 to 7 p.m., Friday and Saturday nights, you're probably looking at about 9 p.m. to about 3-ish a.m. Give or take, every area is a little bit different. This does not include things like events, which, let's say there's a Taylor Swift concert on a Tuesday night. I actually just did a video as a side note that demonstrated Taylor Swift fans, or Swifties, are the best tippers out of anybody when it comes to taking Ubers or Lyft. So if there is a Taylor Swift concert in your area, you definitely should drive for it, right? So these are the peak hours. I'd say on average, there's about, and I'm making numbers up, 20 to 25 big peak hours. Meaning that when you drive during those peak hours, you're like, oh, I'm making a lot of money. But then the second you stop and you go into the non-peak hours, the amount you can make kind of tapers off. I've talked to some drivers, like say in Denver, Colorado, or Las Vegas, Nevada, or Austin, Texas, or Boston, Massachusetts, who are like, yeah, you know what? On a Friday night, I can make $35 an hour. That's a good amount. Until you realize there's only a limited amount of those 35-hour drives, right? There's only a limited amount of those peak hour rides. And I say this for the people watching this video being like, hey, Mark, I'm considering transitioning from part-time to full-time. And I remember I did this, and I'm going to be honest, very transparent on this camera and on my video, as I always am. I love doing Lyft and Uber part-time. I genuinely did. The second I went to full-time, hated it. Now, granted, other people are different. I know some people said, hey, you know what? When I was doing it part-time, I still had another job. I still wasn't completely flexible, just kind of bittersweet. However, the second I started doing it full-time, I had 100% flexibility in my schedule. I never once ever had to talk to a boss or my boss ever again, right? So pros and cons, I know some people who love doing it part-time, hated doing it part-time. I know other people who love doing it full-time, but who hated doing it full-time. These are things to keep in mind. And this was an issue for me that when I was doing it part-time, I was mainly just doing peak hours to make the most amount of money. Then when I transitioned to full-time, I'm like, oh yeah, I've kind of exhausted when I was doing it part-time, all the peak hours. Now that I'm doing it full-time, all the way that I've left are these non-peak hour rides, which don't really pay that much, which means I have to drive significantly more just to make that same amount, right? Like if you want to make $35 an hour in non-peak rides, you may have to drive 2 hours as opposed to just 1 hour. It almost take you double the time to make the same amount of money that you would during a peak time. And these are all these different things to keep in mind. Because like I said at first, if you're let's say going to drive 84 hours in a week, but you can only make, and let's say some of those hours might be peak, some of those hours may be non-peak. These are all these different things to kind of like factor into, which one kind of give you the scope of what to be prepared for. However, I think the benefit of Uber and Lyft, like I've said numerous times, is the fact that you can go out there and you can hit it hard as you want, whenever you want. It is truly instantaneously flexible. At no warning to Uber and Lyft, you can turn on that app, and at no warning to Uber and Lyft, can you turn off the app. It's completely up to you. And I said this before, I remember one time I was interviewing one driver. She told me she did this. She went all out. She went all day. I don't know how she didn't lose her mind. I'm going to be honest. She said for 1 month, she wanted to see as an experiment how much money she could make in 1 month. She would wake up and drive all day to the point that Uber and Lyft said, hey, we're cutting you off. Because remember, I also say this as well as a huge pro tip, sign up for both apps. Sign up for both. Sign up for Uber and for Lyft. Because depending upon your area, and this is a very huge pro tip for this video in particular, Uber may pay more. In your area though, Lyft may pay more. You never know. Maybe on weekends, Uber pays more. Maybe on weekdays, Lyft pays more. I don't know. I'm just making numbers up and I'm making stuff up, but you never know. Sign up with both apps. In addition, maybe on one weekend, Uber says, hey, we're doing this crazy bonus. Boom, you drive for Uber. Maybe on a different weekend, Lyft is doing a crazy bonus. Boom, you drive for that. And that's important because if you're planning on living on this income, if you're planning on being like, hey, I'm going to be a driver and all I'm going to do is live, eat, and breathe Uber and Lyft when it comes to my financial income, sign up for both apps. Because, bit of a hack, and I know some drivers do this, although I suggest not to because it's important when it comes to safety. Like say you wake up and you drive from 8 a.m. to 8 p.m. with Uber. Uber says, hey, you're cut off, you've done the 12 hours. You could potentially drive for Lyft and keep doing that. You could potentially drive 24 hours straight if you want to, if you juggle the apps. Again, I suggest not doing this because you want to be safe and responsible. But, again, I know someone who did this. She basically said she would wake up, drive to the time she was going to go to bed. I don't know what her hours were. I think it was going to be from 7 a.m. to I think 1 a.m. every day. Only slept 6 or 7 hours a night. She did this for a month straight. She made between 10 and 11 grand, she said. It was I think closer to 11 grand if I remember, or 10. I can't remember exactly, but it was between 10 and 11K. And if you think about that, to go all out for 1 month and make 10 to 11K, that means potentially, and this is true, you could potentially make 6 figures being a rideshare driver, right? So that's why when it comes to this video, it's tricky because on one end, the short answer is yes, you can live on that income. You can even make 6 figures as a driver. But how easy is it going to be? How much fun is that going to be? How much could you lose your mind? I mean, I can't imagine for a month straight, for 30 days straight, waking up and all I do is drive day in and day out, day in. I mean, it would be a lot. I'm not going to lie. It would be a lot and I would be exhausted. I would not like it. Definitely not for me, right? But this is something to keep in mind. That for a lot of people, when they look at Uber and Lyft as a potential possibility, well, it is possible, like I said, to live on that income. How easy or hard is it going to be? The truth is, it really depends. It really depends, which is why I bring up all these numbers, why I bring up all these figures in this video, trying to make it as casual as possible, as easy to follow along as possible. That there are a lot of just tricky things to kind of keep in mind, whether it's too many drivers, Lyft and Uber paying their drivers less. There's a lot of talk now of things like wrongful deactivation, which can easily happen. There's a lot of talk now in places like Massachusetts and Minneapolis of having a minimum wage or paid sick leave or unemployment. There's a lot of tricky things that just pop into the equation of being a rideshare driver, which is why I say for everything I've said in this video, the most simple way to think about it is this. If you're going to make $20 an hour, which again, I think is a very easy, maybe even conservative, but I think it's better to be on the low end and be a bit more pessimistic than optimistic for the sake of this video. Can you live on $20 an hour when it comes to driving? Do you have the flexibility? Can you, let's say, drive during the peak hours? If, let's say, you came and said, hey, Mark, I don't have any other job, but let's say I have a family. So because of that, for whatever reason, I can't drive during the peak hours. Living on that income is going to be a lot more difficult and a lot more tedious and annoying than, let's say, if you said to me, hey, Mark, I'm completely open. I'll just drive maybe during the peak hours and then maybe drive other hours or other non-peak hours here and there. In addition, if let's say you have another thing you're pursuing, for example, let's say, when I was pursuing DJing, I was doing Uber and Lyft. Friday and Saturday nights were kind of out of the question because of DJing. That's a huge chunk of income for a lot of Uber and Lyft drivers, right? So I really focused on the morning and evening commutes and Friday and Saturday nights, let's say if I was not DJing. If let's say you're being an actor and let's say things are kind of all over the place with auditioning, although most auditioning now is online because it's a lot easier. Let's say you're trying to audition, well, that may be a lot more feasible. You could do the peak hours, and then in the non-peak hours, like say when the auditions happen and when you book them, you do your auditions, right? But at the end of the day, you need to ask yourself, is $20 an hour enough? Do you have the time and flexibility? And also, I think another big thing, the self-motivation to do so. I know some people who said they started driving and they're like, yeah, it's great, but it's very easy to slack off. Lyft and Uber's not gonna come after you if you don't do those rides. Lyft and Uber's not gonna hound you if actually you didn't make enough money. You're completely on your own. I think it's the closest thing to being your own boss without being your own boss. And I know right now I'm rambling. I know right now I'm taking a million different tangents. But like I said, there is a lot to consider when it comes to this question of can you fully live, I don't know if it's on or off, I'm not sure if that grammatically, if it's, can you live on that Uber and Lyft income? Can you live off it? I don't know, but you get what I'm saying. If let's you only drive for Lyft and Uber, will you be okay on that income? The answer is yes. There are enough hours in the week, and there is a decent hourly rate that when you do all the math out, you can live on it. But one, are you gonna have the time and the work? Two, are you gonna be able to drive enough in general with a peak hour and non-peak hour kind of equation put into place that allows you to live on that, pay bills, put food on the table, take care of a family, whatever the case is. And three, and I think this is the biggest one, is how difficult is going to be for your location. This is where I suggest at the end of the day for a lot of people, start off part-time. Start off part-time. Do those peak hour rides. You may start driving and be like, you know what? Even though I could probably live on it, I don't like driving for Uber and Lyft. I don't like having people in my car and having conversations the whole time. Or you might like it. I don't know. I always suggest for people watching this video or watching any video about doing a full-time or going full-time, with Uber and Lyft, always start off part-time, test out the waters, and then go from there.